This video is part of a series of mini lectures exploring different chapters from my forthcoming book, Researching European Security Integration. This video and this chapter is called Towards a Geopolitical European Commission ? So this chapter deals with this idea that came from the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, that the European Commission should become more geopolitical. I found it interesting given my research interests. My original research, which dates back to my PhD dissertation, was about the role of the European Commission as an international security actor, or the kind of the role the European Commission has carved itself partially to have a role, a unique role in matters of international security. And my overall argument in this chapter is this: European Commission should be cautious. It has built a certain international identity as an international bureaucracy emphasizing problem-driven human security focus and the support for progressive values such as human rights and democracy in vulnerable regions. So the first step in my analysis is to revisit the notion of geopolitics. There is, of course, the kind of early classical approach to geopolitics, and it is represented by people like Alfred Tyerman, Friedrich Ratzel, Halford Mackinder, or Karl Haushofer. Of course, these authors operate with a completely different understanding of geopolitics than the European Commission has in mind. The Commission obviously does not operate with that kind of expansionist and, racist also definition of geopolitics as it was deployed to advise countries, especially Germany, in the 1920s and 1930s. At the same time, there hasn't been that much coming from the European Commission in terms of defining its own understanding of what it means for the European Commission to be a geopolitical actor, or, for that matter, what it means for the European Union to be a more geopolitical actor in international relations. Now, regardless of the definition, I suggest that the European Commission should consider risks associated with this kind of changing of its international identity. As a non-state actor, the Commission can be considered an international bureaucracy. And the behavior of international bureaucracies has been nicely defined in the book Rules for the World by Martha Finamore and Michael Barnett. Drawing on Max Weber, they identified international organizations to be morally superior compared to self-serving nation states, as well as enjoying higher levels of expertise on specialist modern problems. International organizations derive their legitimacy from delegation by member states, but also by claims to moral values and expertise. And these are fundamentally important sources of legitimacy for international bureaucracies. So the moral superiority of international bureaucracies stems from the objectives they pursue and the manner in which they pursue them. Typically, international organizations are created by states to pursue progressive, socially valued goals such as the promotion of international cooperation, non-proliferation, peace, economic development, and the rule of law. if we look at the European Commission's approach to international security, it has always followed this bureaucratic blueprint or bureaucratic identity. It has engaged in the program of nuclear safety assistance with Russia in the 1990s. And again, this is something that I researched originally for my PhD dissertation and then discussed also in my first book, The EU as an international security actor. The European Commission has operated financial programs to create regional stability across the world. The first kind of substantive kind of that program, of that instrument, was called Instrument for Stability. It later, in subsequent budgetary cycles, it was reframed, called different names, but the European Commission has had instruments to engage with international security for a long time. And for example, through those kinds of programs, it developed numerous initiatives. One prominent example of such initiative is CBRN Centers of Excellence. CBRN stands for Chemical, Biological, Radiological, and Nuclear Centers of Excellence. If you're not familiar with this initiative, I would encourage you to look it up. It's an interesting example of how the European Commission specifically has been what we can call a norm entrepreneur or a policy entrepreneur, perhaps more accurately, developing initiatives in the field of international security. Over time, what we can observe is that the Commission leadership has been getting increasingly political. It has become a norm for each new Commission president to outline the policy priorities for the coming years or to present the state of the European Union to the European Parliament. The logical outcome of politicization is that the Commission's goals do not have to be presented as progressive, low-key, technical, and focused on improving human security. Instead, they can be openly contentious, ideologically charged, and concern high-profile issues. If Jean Monnet's mantra was to focus on the specifics, such as regulating the market for coal and steel, in order to achieve the general, such as lasting peace in Europe, today's European Commission must do the opposite. Its leaders are expected to offer a compelling and ambitious political strategy and iron out the specifics later. This observation brings us to Ursula von der Leyen and her Geopolitical European Commission. This is the statement, this is the proposition that she made in 2019 when she said that the Commission must become geopolitical and it must become more strategic, more assertive, and more united. Other than that, there are hints in different places, different speeches, and different documents as to what Geopolitical Commission means. For example, in her mission statement to the Commissioner designate for Neighborhood and Enlargement, von der Leyen suggested that she is concerned about external influence in the Western Balkans and insisted on keeping the membership route open for the countries in the region. It's interesting because in the past, the enlargement of the European Union to a significant extent has been considered a political and often technical process with all the criteria that prospective member states would have to meet. It was not so much considered a geopolitical process, even though it had geopolitical consequences. But now this element has become much more explicit, much more prominent in considerations about the boundaries of the European Union. A good example of this is offering the prospect of EU membership to Ukraine. The prospect that perhaps would not have been made so explicit if Ukraine was not invaded by Russia with a kind of full force, full invasion in February 2022. So this is an interesting aspect of how the European Commission leadership incorporates this kind of geopolitical language, the language of geopolitics and power, into its narrative. In the chapter, I argue that there are risks associated with the Geopolitical Commission, which should be considered. I'm not saying that the Commission should not go that route, but there are risks and they should be considered and somehow mitigated. I also argue that there is a way for the Commission's approach to security to be more reflective of the global power politics. The Commission should not ignore the reality, right? There are competing powers, there is power, there are geopolitical considerations, there is ever more assertive China, there is aggressive Russia, there are other considerations which have to do with the kind of more traditional understanding of geopolitics and power politics. So the Commission's approach can be more reflective of this reality, but there is a way at the same time for the Commission to maintain its unique identity. I specifically look in the chapter into the principles, methods, and instruments that the Commission has at its disposal. In terms of the principles, the Commission is best placed to continue with its problem-driven security development approach. Diversity in EU approaches, as long as they are complementary, are the EU's strength. The Commission's method has been representative of international bureaucracies in that it strives to be specific and addressing problems and work towards uplifting progressive, socially valued goals. As such, I suggest it should not be considered an obstacle for the increasingly strategic European Union. Instead, it should be viewed as one of the EU's core assets, complementing the more politically or geopolitically minded common foreign and security policy. As for instruments, the Commission has an extensive experience of using problem-driven security instruments, which, as I already mentioned, started with the Instrument for Stability, and those instruments have been evolving. There are good reasons to allow the Commission to remain true to its founding principles and its problem-solving methodology. While the Commission should not be deploying instruments in this regard to the EU's overall outlook and geopolitical realities on the ground, it should still work towards circumventing the specific high politics obstacles, just like Monnet circumvented the well-grounded mistrust between Germany and France by directing his efforts towards a working solution to a shared problem. In other words, there is a scope for complementarity between the Commission's own unique approach, which should remain unique, and the more geopolitical common foreign and security policy, common security and defense policy, what used to be the former second pillar of the European Union. There is a scope for complementarity. Those two kind of elements or components of EU international security identity, they do not have to be identical to be coherent and to be complementary.